You step onto the pitch-black deck of a wooden vessel trapped in the freezing white squalls of the North Atlantic, and the crushing reality of winter at sea hits your senses all at once. The bitter, bone-chilling sting of salt spray freezing instantly against your raw, bleeding cheeks, the overwhelming, nauseating stench of damp oakum, stagnant bilge water, and unwashed wool filling your lungs, and the relentless, deafening roar of 30-knot winds ripping through the thick hemp rigging above. While a single ship's rat scurries across the slick deck planks, desperate to find a crevice to escape the sub-zero wind chill, and your fingers burn with a deep, numbing ache that signals the rapid approach of frostbite because you have been on watch for 3 hours straight, and there is no heat source anywhere on this vessel to rescue you. A stark reality, where the dark ocean moving beneath the hull is a silent executioner waiting for your body temperature to drop, forcing you to realize that this world does not care if you survive. The calendar on the wall reads 1858, and you are trapped in the suffocating, unyielding machinery of Victorian London, a city boasting unparalleled imperial wealth, yet harboring over 2 million people crammed into lethal squalor, where your survival depends entirely on your position as a low-wage manual laborer in a social hierarchy so rigid that the top 1% controls over 80% of the land, a world where the law offers you absolutely no protection against starvation, and your freedom is entirely conditional upon your ability to work every single day without failing, meaning that your social status was inherited from the grinding poverty of your parents and cannot be escaped through sheer will, a systemic reality where the powerful dictate your movements and the state views your illness not as a misfortune to be treated, but as a moral failure to be managed or ignored, forcing you to realize that you did not choose this life, it chose you. The year is 1715, during the brutal peak of the golden age of piracy, and you are trapped within a floating wooden prison in the middle of a trackless ocean, where your survival depends entirely on your position as an outcast mariner who has rejected the authority of the crown to live under the black flag. A social tier where historical statistics reveal that over 80% of all sailors under 30 years old succumb to disease, drowning, or exposure before ever seeing a port of retirement, a harsh world where the maritime laws of the British Empire treat you as a disposable commodity and your freedom is an illusion bought with a hangman's noose, forcing you into a corner where your daily life is defined by a lack of mobility and conditional protection from a crew that will throw you overboard the moment your limbs freeze solid and you can no longer pull a line. An unyielding systemic reality where you did not choose this life, it chose you. If you get near the freezing Atlantic waters, you realize that the survival rulebook is completely useless here because finding a heat source is a luxury you cannot afford. A wooden sailing ship is basically a floating bonfire waiting for a reason to explode, with its hull wood, decks wood, masts wood, ropes tarred hemp, and sails canvas, meaning that a single spark near the gunpowder magazine 3 decks below your feet could scatter 60 men across the ocean in seconds. The rule is absolute. 1 fire on the entire ship, a single iron stove in the galley built into a sand-filled hearth with iron cladding, carefully controlled, and nowhere near where the crew sleeps. You sleep in total darkness, in total cold, with no heat source anywhere near you, relying purely on the physics of the orlop deck beneath the waterline, where the wooden hull becomes a passive thermal wall trapping the heat of 30 human radiators breathing in a sealed space to keep the ambient temperature just above freezing. Your survival labor begins long before the first pale winter light breaks across the horizon, matching the unyielding, mechanical demands of a sailing ship where manual work never stops for the changing of seasons or the plummeting of temperatures, as you drag your exhausted body up the icy shroud lines at 4 o'clock in the morning to reef frozen canvas sails with your bare hands, using primitive iron marlinspikes and wooden fids that freeze to your skin on contact while the North Atlantic winter acts as an aggressive, lethal antagonist, freezing the salt spray into a slick glaze over every rope, winch, and deck plank, a year-round physical degradation that breaks human joints and erodes spinal discs over months of repetition, leaving clear archaeological evidence in the twisted, scarred skeletal remains found in maritime graves across the world. The food that keeps your heart beating through the freezing night shifts is a repetitive, strictly rationed cycle of severe nutritional deficiency, consisting almost entirely of a single block of rock-hard ship's biscuit infested with weevils, and a bowl of salted beef so thoroughly cured in brine that it looks like mahogany wood and tastes like pure salt. A narrow diet governed entirely by what can survive months in a damp cargo hold, while strict naval laws and class-based restrictions keep fresh meat, clean water, and green vegetables completely out of your reach, making your life an endless confrontation with chronic hunger that leaves your body unable to generate its own internal heat and keeps your mind in a state of psychological exhaustion, rendering you highly vulnerable to the next cycle of spoilage when a leaking hatch ruins a water barrel and the threat of severe scurvy or dehydration turns an entire crew into walking ghosts before they can find land. The water you use to wash down your dry, salted rations is drawn from slimy wooden casks where stagnant rainwater mixes with airborne bacteria, making every sip a dangerous gamble with invisible threats like dysentery, typhus, and camp fevers that can ravage an enclosed crew within a week, an environment where maritime statistics show that disease killed vastly more sailors than actual naval battles ever did. And the average life expectancy for ordinary seamen drops below 24 years. Once they enter deep-water voyages, a devastating mortality managed by an absolute vacuum of genuine medical knowledge where shipboard surgeons still treat internal infections with bloodletting, hot irons, and toxic mercury compounds, leaving you completely defenseless against the contagions breeding rapidly in the dark, unventilated spaces below the waterline. The everyday items around you hold hidden, lethal dangers that strike without warning, such as the damp grain stored in the galley which easily becomes infected by a toxic rye fungus that causes ergotism, a visceral poisoning that mimics the symptoms of wet gangrene, causing your limbs to burn with an internal fire, your toes to blacken and rot, and your mind to suffer from terrifying, vivid hallucinations of demons in the rigging, a harsh class contrast to the wealthy merchants and captains who consume private stores of fresh flour and clean wine while the ordinary poor are left to rot from invisible killers hidden in plain sight, a physical torment that the ship's chaplain attributes to divine judgment for your mutinous sins or a lack of religious devotion, demonstrating how even the basic food, drink, and wood of your vessel can become weaponized against your survival by the harsh economics of the sea. Religion and the maritime code operate as tightly coordinated mechanisms of control, with the ship's articles enforcing a strict framework of absolute obedience to the collective will of the crew and the tactical commands of the captain, using pseudo-religious oaths sworn on Bibles to reinforce your compliance and prevent open mutiny on a vessel that is always one mistake away from destruction. While the pirate code enforces this hierarchy through public, visible punishments like marooning on a desert sandbar, 50 lashes with a cat o' nine tails for stealing water, or death by drowning, using fear as an unyielding tool to maintain peace and order on a crowded deck where dozens of volatile, armed men must live together without killing each other, showing that the law at sea is an absolute machine built to crush individual weakness for the survival of the ship. War is not a distant political event for your crew. It is an economic reality that dictates your movements across the Atlantic, for when the European empires enter conflicts like the War of the Spanish Succession, the impact ripples immediately onto your deck through the sudden presence of massive naval fleets, heavily armed privateers, and the closure of neutral trading ports, forcing your pirate vessel into high-risk waters to chase increasingly armed merchant prizes, while the threat of naval raids or a sudden engagement with a 60-gun ship of the line hangs over your crew every hour, taking away the brothers and shipmates whose labor kept the vessel afloat and leaving behind a shattered hull, ruined rigging, and an economic destruction that dooms a crew to starvation long after the cannons have stopped firing, proving that the structural violence of war only needs to pass through your life once to completely destroy you. If you are a woman trying to survive within this harsh maritime universe, the weight is doubled and entirely invisible, for the strict rules of the ship's articles explicitly ban women from the vessel under penalty of death or marooning, forcing those who choose the sea to completely erase their identity, binding their chests with canvas, changing their names, and adopting the rough clothes, crude language, and exhausting manual labor of a common seaman to maintain a disguise that is always one medical inspection away from execution, An unyielding routine of invisible domestic and tactical labor where you must face the constant gamble of injury or illness with no access to privacy, knowing that if your identity is discovered, you face immediate violence, exile, or ritual humiliation at the hands of a desperate crew. An intersection of hardship where your only weapon is absolute silence and endurance until it ends. To cope with this absolute freezing misery, the crews turned aggressively to alcohol, issues of half a pint of rum a day being standard issue on a wooden barrel. While modern survival science knows that alcohol dilates your blood vessels, rushing heat from your core to your skin, and actually making your body colder by escaping its vital reserves, pirates drank hot grog, rum mixed with boiling water, sugar, and lemon, to create a temporary, real warmth in the stomach and chest that shocked frozen bodies back into function, just long enough to dull the sensory misery and drop into an alcohol-assisted sleep shift. The world should collapse under the weight of this institutionalized cruelty, yet it remains standing because the ordinary outcasts trapped within its machinery possess an incredible, collective resilience, adapting to the freezing cold, the hunger, and the constant threat of disease by lowering their expectations of life until the simple act of surviving another watch becomes a profound victory of the human spirit. Finding small moments of hope in a shared cup of hot grog, a successful raid, or a ballast stone that keeps the drinking water from freezing solid through a sub-zero night, a history that completely rejects any romanticized narrative of pirate elegance and reveals that they survived because they adapted to cruelty, choosing every single day to keep breathing and to keep their humanity alive in a world built to exploit them. Crew members who spend enough winters at sea simply knew the tactical value of everything on board, right down to the hundreds of rats nesting in the orlop deck, which were tolerated because dozens of warm-bodied mammals moving through the dark actually raised the ambient temperature by those critical 2 degrees, when the baseline meaning of life was survival. Captains would even heat large ballast stones on beach fires during shore stops and load them back into the lowest hold, radiating warmth for 12 hours straight to create a passive heated floor that kept fresh drinking water barrels from turning to solid ice through the coldest nights. Modern survival experts looked at what these 47 men did that night in 1715 and said it should have killed every single one of them, but by using the natural thermal properties of the orlop deck beneath the waterline, rubbing sheep's lanolin and whale oil deep into their wool garments to create the world's first waterproof coats, and packing their bodies together into an unventilated hull alongside hundreds of warm-bodied rats to raise the ambient temperature by those vital 2 degrees. They broke every modern safety rule to achieve absolute survival. They did everything wrong according to the handbooks, and yet they lived because wrong in the right combination was accidentally exactly right. It was a brutal lifestyle where men faked illness just to spend a night tucked inside the sickbay right beside the galley fire, picking at scabs and swallowing soap just to trade a damp, freezing hammock for a few hours of stockpiled wool blankets, an extreme environment where the smartest captains simply navigated by temperature maps, sailing south to the Caribbean between November and March because crews who ignored the seasonal shifts faced casualty rates above 40% from pure cold alone. If this raw, unfiltered journey into the dark realities of 1715 gave you a perspective you did not have before, hit the subscribe button now to join us every week as we uncover the vital, hidden history that the textbooks leave out, and tell us in the comments below which of these extreme survival methods shocked you the most.